Good evening, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Welcome to the Visibility Matters, LGBTQI and Aging part of our 2022 virtual education series, Moral Curiosity. Thank you for taking your time this evening to be with us. Like Jennifer said, my name is Alan Doy. I'm a board member of Roots and Roads, a community hospice foundation here in Tucson, Arizona, and it's a pleasure to meet you all and be here with you. For those of you who don't know us, our foundation vision is to transform end-of-life experience into the final act of living well. The way we do this is through our supplemental support of hospice patients. We provide education. We provide, did somebody say something? All right. Like I said, the way we do this is through our supplemental support of hospice patients. We support research around end-of-life care, and we also provide education about end-of-life issues through sessions such as the one we are all about to hear tonight. Wanted to touch on some of the impact in 2022. As you can see, we had about 38 patient requests. They have been fulfilled for a total of $37,000. 35 individuals participated in the bereavement groups and received free workbooks to support their grief process, so on and so on. So you can see that we try to get involved and do whatever we can to help the community and end of life as they go through that difficult process. That being said, I will turn things over to David. He's our Director of Community Engagement. He will introduce our speaker. And yeah, David.
Thanks so much, Al. I really appreciate it.
Betcha.
We are so grateful to Pima Council on Aging for sponsoring tonight's event. It's because of their collaboration with us that we're all able to come together tonight. And they're just an amazing community partner. We work together in lots of different venues, and we're so happy to be able to collaborate tonight. And we're especially grateful to Sarah Bahnson for being with us. Sarah, as you can see from a brief bio, is the LGBTQI plus community liaison for PCOA. Sarah has worked extensively throughout the community at Wingspan, Southern Arizona AIDS Foundation, Tucson Interfaith HIV/AIDS Network. Really, it's a decade of care and service to the Tucson community on really helping us better understand the realities, gifts, strengths, and issues of the LGBTQI plus community. And so tonight, we're going to continue that conversation with Sarah with Visibility Matters. Sarah, I'm not going to take any more of your time. We're going to turn things over to you so you can begin your presentation. But thank you so much for being with us.
Great. Thank you, David. And thank you, Roots and Roads, for inviting me. I'm so pleased to be here with you all. I see a few of you in the audience that are familiar faces. I'm so happy to see you all again. Thank you for being here. And let me go ahead and share my screen with you. This screen sounds best to me. Y'all seeing it? We've got Visibility Matters up. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. That being up now, I would like to just invite you to please take care of yourself throughout this presentation. I love to have your faces up so that I have someone to present to, but if you prefer to have your cameras off, that's fine. Like Jennifer and David had said, if we could keep questions and comments to the end, that would be best. We do have a lot to cover. That being said, if there's something that I've covered that you don't yet understand, I would hate to plow forward without you. So please do stop me, ask for clarification. I appreciate the conversation. And you can do that either in the chat or just unmute yourselves and go ahead and ask me. Additionally, throughout this presentation, I have some video material, and sometimes it can be a little bit challenging to listen to. They recount some difficult experiences with our local LGBTQ older adults. So if you need to step away and take care of yourselves, please do so. All right, let's get started. Today, we are going to be learning about LGBTQI plus older adults. We're going to talk about a little bit of history, some history that has impacted some disparities and barriers to care that are experienced in this community, as well as some local supports and responsive care. All right, here's one of those videos.
Goals for aging for myself are to have quality of life, stay connected to my family and to my community, to age in place until I can't anymore, and then have to decide what to do then. Transitioning to some kind of continuing care community is not inevitable. However, it is something that I think many of us will have to consider. That aging in place is important and is key, but again, as gay people, as LGBTQI plus people, most of us do not have children who are going to take care of us. We don't have that sort of built-in security. We have friends, and our friends are aging along with us.
And as I continue to age, it's one of the things I'm looking for in the future. I want to go somewhere where I'm accepted for who I am, so where it's understood that I have had a journey through life that different from many people, but the same as many other people, that they understand what it means to be a senior gay adult.
Well, one of the things I like to do in thinking about this is to back up a little bit and say, why does this even matter? Why are we even talking about this? We need to talk about it because in most aging services, at this point, the concept of person-directed care is really the guiding theory. So we need to get to know people to work with them. And so part of working with any group and any person is understanding their identities. And all of us have many identities, of course. The queer identity may or may not be the primary identity someone leads with or wants to talk about. But it's important that we know basically, well, who's been important to you in your life? Because in aging, that's what we're doing. We're finding out about priorities, values, decisions, most importantly, relationships. Who cares for you? Who do you love? And without knowing that, we can't do a very good job of serving someone, whether it's in an outpatient community setting, if it's aging at home, if it's in a hospital, hospice, or memory care.
I think that video does a really good job of painting an overall picture of why this is important, right? So before we get too far into the weeds with this, let's back up and think about aging care structure, what our jobs are, what the mission is, right? And it's our job to ensure as peaceful a transition as possible for the dying, for their loved ones, for whatever that means to each family, to each dying person. And to offer that kind of support, we really need to have the ability to get to know folks, right? If person-centered care is our guiding principles, we need to be able to get to know people, right? There's a certain amount of relationship building that we need to do. But LGBTQI plus people may be reluctant to share themselves authentically with us. For a lot of very valid reasons, historical and present, they're reluctant to be authentic with us as providers. So getting to know a little bit about this community, I hope will help you create an environment in which LGBTQI plus folks feel like they can be authentic with us, that it is safe to come out and they can talk about themselves, their loved ones, the lives they've lived, to make it easier for us to do our jobs and really ease that transition from living to dying for the dying and for their loved ones as well. And Roots and Roads really has that in your vision statement, right? Ensuring hospice patients and their loved ones are empowered to transform the end-of-life experience into the final act of living well. What does living well mean? But to be authentically yourself and to feel comfortable in that as we're wrapping up the show. So backing up, aging care goals overall, I think you heard this reflected to some degree in the video, but this is some things that folks tend to report when they're asked about aging. And this is really carried forward when we're thinking about hospice and palliative care as well, right? These goals don't disappear just because our bodies are breaking down. The ability to achieve some of these goals may break down. But these are some of the goals that people report, right? We want to be safe where we are, physically, psychologically. Most folks want to remain in their home. Fortunately, hospice care has shifted to help support that effort in many ways. So lots of folks don't have to go to a place, right? Hospice is no longer a place as much as it is a bunch of services for the end of life. So that helps folks maintain independence as they're dying as well. We also don't want to be burdens to our loved ones, right? And the more our bodies break down and the more we need assistance being shepherded from life to death, it can feel like a burden. But these are goals that we all have, right? We don't want to be burdens to others, typically. So those are some things to keep in mind, just structurally in the aging care realm. This is kind of the wishes of the older adults. And then let's look at some of the structures, right? If we're looking specifically at hospice and palliative care, but also aging care overall, we have formal supports and we have informal supports. Aging care structure really heavily relies on informal supports for a number of things. No replacement for doctors, nurses, specialists, right? Medical professionals. But when it comes to implementing some things, when folks are admitted into hospice or palliative care, there are some loved ones that may be in charge of actually administering the meds, right? Or advocating for the dying, monitoring pain levels and kind of end of life wishes as they change, as they remain the same, but really advocating for the patient in care. Those informal supports are really, really important, and they're not always present for this community, right? So keep in mind, informal supports, top ones here, I have spouses and children. Keep that in mind because it's going to be really, really important for this community. There are some complications. The diverse lives of this community indicate that for some LGBTQ people, there are some specific challenges that we're going to need to be aware of and maybe ask some additional questions, maybe offer some additional support. All right, I promised you some history. We're going to talk about some history. So older adults that we're talking about, we're going to say grew up in 20s, 30s, 40s, right? Or were born 20s, 30s, 40s, right? Grew up during the mid 20th century. And that was a really unique time in our country's history. So the presentation I have for us today is very specific to the United States. I want you to know that other countries have their own attitudes and beliefs about LGBTQ people, and it's not always pretty. I'm taking this perspective because of where we currently are, right? So keep in mind the many facets of identities that are also present within LGBTQI plus communities may mean that you're working with somebody that is also potentially undocumented or has immigrated from another country and didn't have this exact experience. But I do want you to have some sort of historical context for some lived experience, right? So during this mid-20th century, it wasn't a pretty sign for LGBTQ people, right? This community was seen as sinners, as mentally ill. Being lesbian, gay, bisexual was criminalized. It was illegal to be in a same-sex relationship. There were also some dress code laws that made it illegal for a person like me to dress the way that I am today. If you were born with XYZ parts, then you are not allowed to wear XYZ outfits, and that was illegal during this time. A lot of folks lost jobs, housing, friends, family, community support because of the attitudes and beliefs around being LGBTQ. So the incentive to remain in the closet was really, really great, right? If you could lose your job, your loved ones, everything that you knew at the time, coming out may not have been an option for you, right? It might not have felt like, and oftentimes wasn't a safe thing to do.
I grew up in the 50s when it was really taboo to be queer and while as a young person, I almost think that at age 10, I realized that I was different. I didn't have a word for it, but I felt very self-conscious. I certainly didn't want anyone to think I was queer, and yet other people seemed to recognize that I was. I can remember, a little boy running after me, yelling queer, and different things that people said to me that indicated that they knew before I really had the word for it. I really didn't know. I knew some gay men, but I didn't really know a lesbian until I was like in my mid-30s.
I grew up all in the 50s and 60s, and I had no idea that I was a lesbian. And in high school, there were two women that were suspended from school because they were caught kissing in the girls' locker room. I worked with a woman who was deaf, grew up Muslim, and was very butch. You couldn't miss it. You couldn't miss that she was a lesbian. But it was never talked about. She never talked about it.
I entered into a drum and bugle corps, and it was a really good experience. We were called the Starlights, and we were going all over Wisconsin, on our little rickety bus. So one evening after the competition, I was back in the hotel, and I was jumped by four guys. They pinned me down, and with a black shoe polish, they painted a target on my stomach. And they said, every time we see you, we're going to punch that target because you're a fag.
It's a really tough video for a number of reasons. Every time, obviously that last one with John describing an assault, right, when he was young, that's not an uncommon experience for a number of LGBTQI plus folks. But I'm also struck by the idea that you could turn into a fully formed 30-year-old human being and not see another person like you in the world until you're in your 30s. How does that affect your own development? Feeling that isolated, feeling like you were the only one in the world that might feel this way. And Lavina had recounted that this was not talked about in her neighborhood, in her community. And if it was, usually it was an insult, right? Joyce had recounted being called queer when she was a kid, which also not an uncommon experience. Things were pretty challenging during this time in which this crowd of older adults was growing up. During this time, early 50s, mid 50s, around the same time as the McCarthy era Red Scare, was the Lavender Scare, right? So the Lavender Scare was an effort to identify gays and lesbians in government service and remove them. Dwight D. Eisenhower enacted an executive order in 1952 explicitly banning lesbian, gay, bisexual people from government office. More than 5,000 people were fired. And who knows how many people wouldn't have pursued or had subsequently lost their jobs after this time, because this executive order was in place until 1993, 1994, when Bill Clinton enacted Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And that didn't change things a whole lot either, right? Because that's really saying, all right, it's legal for you to serve, but you can't come out. You have to be quiet about it. You can't be your authentic self because it's not okay. So you can have this job as long as you're in the closet about who you are. That's not cool. And that remained in place for at least another 10 years. I think it was 2003 that became legal for LGBTQI plus people to work in government office. How does that impact aging care? Rhetorical question for now. Around the same time, American Psychiatric Association is kind of codifying their practices, and they come up with the first DSM, right? Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's the big Bible of mental health concerns, right? So same-sex relationship, same-sex sex is included in this as a sociopathic personality disturbance. And it was really the first time that there was scientific weight given to discriminatory practices. And I'm using scare quotes for science here because wasn't exactly science, but it did give weight to discriminatory practices, and some of the treatments were pretty brutal, like electroshock therapy, lobotomies, conversion therapy. I mean, I think that there are a number of states and communities that are still battling conversion therapy, which has been proven to not change anything, to not be beneficial to anybody. So this really impacted the way that the community felt about themselves, as well as how outside communities saw LGBTQ folks, right? Oftentimes, when we're thinking about discrimination, reports of discrimination within our institutions, sometimes it's not staff, sometimes it's other residents that grew up during the same time and have had no cause to challenge their thoughts and belief systems. So this designation remained in the DSM until 1973 and was only removed after a whole lot of activism to get it removed. The time in which this community grew up was a really challenging time. I'm really just going to let them say it for themselves.
I was in the city of Chicago. I worked in the poverty programs. And at that time, the papers would be filled with stories of gay men being arrested in bars and hauled off in police cars, and their names published and their occupations published. People lost lots of jobs, teachers lost their jobs. So there was quite an atmosphere of fear.
Quite an atmosphere of fear. So it wasn't only people that were working for the government, right? You could be fired for being LGBTQ up until very, very recently, depending on where you lived. A number of people lost their jobs. It didn't have to be just in government service. And I want you to imagine what Joyce said practically, right? This is a number of institutions working together to create a very hostile environment for this community, right? So we'll imagine we have an LGBTQ bar, just social space that is subjected to police raids, which were very common during the time. And law enforcement worked with news organizations to ensure that the names that they arrested that night were printed the following day in the paper for the express purpose of letting the community know, during this time, we're seen as sinners, predators, criminalized, right? So this is a number of institutions working together to
I worked.
discriminate against this community. Now, I hope that we all have a keen awareness that things aren't still quite like that. Discrimination is not in our rearview mirror. In no way am I saying that. We are still, and for a number of identities, for a number of people, discrimination is still a daily barrier to services, but it's not quite what it was in the 50s, 60s, 70s, right? There's a bunch of bits of legislation, Supreme Court decisions that have shifted the bar forward a little bit. So I want to highlight the Stonewall Uprising as one of those things. The Stonewall Uprising is largely considered to be the birthplace of the LGBTQI plus civil rights movement. And that was one of those LGBTQ establishments, right? Stonewall Inn was a bar in New York that was owned by the mafia, who had paid off law enforcement so that they would know when police raids were coming, and they could let folks know, do whatever you needed to do, switch up who you're dancing with, change ties, or whatever you had to do to not be arrested. For whatever reason on this night, they were not informed that the police were coming, and there was a raid, and there was a lot of confusion, and folks fought back, and they fought back for 6 days. A number of activists and just neighborhood members in this community came forward to confront what was happening. This is what we celebrate every year during Pride, is the Stonewall Uprising. This is considered the birthplace of the LGBTQ civil rights movement because a number of activist organizations cropped up very shortly after this. So you'll see Lambda Legal down here came not that far along afterwards. The two folks that are pictured on the right, if anybody can name them, you get extra brownie points from me. They are very cool people, but they also started up an activist organization called STAR, which is Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. And that was an organization that helped trans and non-binary youth experiencing homelessness and provided some supportive services to them. So if there's any of these bits of history that you want to talk about, please let me know, but I'm just going to highlight that one for now. This next one, first off, note, Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson are the two pictured. They're very cool people. If you have Netflix, Marsha P. Johnson has a documentary on Netflix called The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson. She's certainly somebody worth knowing. She's the one on the right holding the umbrella. So what I want to highlight on this one is June 2020, because this one just blows my face off every time I think about it. June 2020 is the Supreme Court, excuse me, Supreme Court decision that extended the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the employment protection to LGBTQ plus people. So think about that. Up until 2020, 2 years ago, up until 2020, it was legal to be fired for LGBTQ, depending on where you lived. Now, Tucson, specifically the city of Tucson, has had employment protections for a number of years. But if you have been in the state for very long at all, you know that this is a retirement state. People come here all the time to retire. You may be working with somebody that is not a native Arizonan, that may have experienced employment discrimination, illegal employment discrimination from some other state, some other city, even locally. Just because we have employment protection doesn't mean that we experience justice, right? Something being illegal and something and achieving justice, two different things, and discrimination is really difficult to prove. So think about how that might impact maybe the nest egg of somebody that is aging. Okay, I'm going to take a 30-second break, drink some water before we get going on the basics. Ooh, it just seems inevitable that I get a frog in my throat tonight. All right. Okay, I think I'm fine. So the basics, we're going to back it up a little bit. So before you have the heteronormative box. And it sounds fancy. It's not, you know, this one. I'm going to draw a line down the middle of it. And we're going to draw a line down the middle of it. There we go. Now we have a binary system. And on one side of the box, we have somebody that is born with XX chromosomes and a vagina, and their body produces estrogen. And those folks are expected to identify as women or female, and I dress and behave and act in a feminine way, right? And have romantic interests in people on the other side of the box who are born with XY chromosomes and penises, and their bodies produce testosterone. You get the idea, right? So these folks are expected to identify as men and dress and behave in a masculine way and have romantic interests in people on the other side of the box. This looks familiar, right? For many of us, this is what we grew up with. This is kind of a dominant assumption for how people are. And there's nothing wrong with this. This works for a great many people. The problem is it doesn't work for everybody, right? That's why I'm here. This leaves some people out. Unfortunately, our institutions tend to build their policies and procedures around this assumption. And so we have things like intake forms that say, check the box, male or female. Well, that's okay if this really encompassed everybody, but it doesn't. All right, sexual identity, gender expression, these are all things that we all have, right? But they are all distinctly different characteristics. So sexual identity is who we are attracted to whatever degree we are attracted to other people. Gender is our own internal concept of ourselves, and gender expression is how we demonstrate that to the world. And I know maybe it looks a little bit silly, this cartoony unicorn image, but it does a really good job of showing us where these things exist in the body, right? So gender identity, we see this rainbow is living in the mind of this beautiful unicorn. So gender identity exists, it's our own internal perspectives, right? Gender expression is all of this delightfulness, right? Everything that the unicorn is showing us is gender expression. Gender expression and gender identity may not always align in the ways that we expect them to, and that's okay. That can happen for a number of reasons. We'll go into that in a little bit. Sex assigned at birth is different than gender. That is a physical constitution. So we're talking about, you'll see here, we've got this little helix. So that's really to indicate the physical construction of birth, or not birth, birth sex. So chromosomes, hormones, reproductive organs, genitalia, all of those things construct our sex assigned at birth. Not always in relationship with how we perceive our gender. Not always in relationship with how we demonstrate that to the world. And not always in relationship with how we would perceive how physical and emotional attraction happens. So attraction, you can see here, happens in the feels center of the unicorn. So that's how all of those are different and how they are in relationship with each other. Does that all make sense? Okay. If you have questions, please do feel free to stop me.
There were very strict expectations for what girls were supposed to be like, and I didn't meet any of those expectations.
There was something within me that continued to push me to hide. And I thought, what better protection to go into the service? So I looked at all the branches of the service, and I thought, you know, most of them were not going to give me what I was really looking for, until I saw the poster for the Marines that said, do you want to be a man? Sign of fear.
There are ways that we do gender, right? This is kind of a performance that we do for each other, and we all receive messages about how well we're doing. Just think about the last time that you encountered somebody that you couldn't tell if they were a man or a woman, and what your brain did to you, right? It made you stop, and it made you really try and look for signs, right? That's normal. That is how we have all been conditioned. But like I said before, we don't all have to perform gender in the ways that are expected in order to deserve respect, right? For a number of reasons, we don't always show up in the ways that are expected. Okay, we'll get more into that when I talk about trans non-binary folks and what that all means. For now, I want to do a bit of an acronym breakdown. So I have LGBTQI plus all in here. Well, maybe not the plus as much, a little bit of the plus. I kind of expect that for most of us, our basic understanding of LGBTQI plus people has been a little bit elevated in the last 10 years. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the LGB, but again, if you have questions, stop me, ask your questions. I love them. But I am going to fly through this. So LGB, lesbian, gay, bisexual. Lesbian, women attracted to other women. Gay is men attracted to other men. Bisexual is an attraction to more than one gender. You may also hear pansexual, the more we learn about gender being on a much larger spectrum than just male and female. There are some folks that prefer to identify as pansexual just because it indicates more genders than only two, which is the Latin root of bi. Pop quiz. Get your chat box ready or take yourselves off of mute. I want actual answers to this. If a woman says she was married to a man before her current same-sex relationship and tells you she's a lesbian, what's the most appropriate identification for her? Y'all got this. I know you do.
She told you she's a lesbian.
Hey, there's one. All right. All right, chat.
I would say how she defines herself. Yeah.
Hey, great. Okay. I just lost the chat again. Where's the chat? There we go.
In the chat.
Lesbian. Okay, great. You all are pros. Lesbian, because we all get to determine who we are, right? When is it ever okay for somebody else to tell us who we are? It's not. She tells us that she's a lesbian. She's a lesbian. There are as many different definitions for these terms as there are people that claim them. And even if somebody has a history that might be unexpected for somebody outside of that living person, it doesn't mean that they're misconstrued, right? We all get to determine who we are. Trans, non-binary folks. So the trend now is to just say trans. You may also hear transgender, which is not wrong, but it is okay to just say trans in terms of language. And this is really an umbrella term for folks whose gender is different than our social expectations based on sex assigned at birth. You may also hear along with this identity is transition, and that's just a process of changing some of our gendered attributes to more closely align with our internal sense of ourselves. Not all people who are trans will change their physiology, not all want to, and that is for a number of reasons. Let's start talking about a few. So not everyone that is trans wants to, for one, and doesn't need to have any further reason. But it can be a physically challenging process, right? If you were talking about hormone replacement therapy or gender affirming surgeries, right? Gender affirming surgery is a surgical intervention, right? That's a big process that the body would undergo, as well as hormone replacement therapy. It essentially throws you into, most of the time, a second puberty. I don't know about you, but I didn't enjoy the first one. A lot of folks are not in a hurry for a second one. But also, these sorts of interventions are part of our medical system, and they can be very expensive. And healthcare, health insurance is very frequently tied to our employment situations. And if you belong to an employer that does not see you, value your identity, your employer oftentimes has control over what kind of healthcare you can receive. And if you're a trans person working for an organization that does not value you, chances are you're not going to be able to get trans appropriate healthcare. Ooh, I am so sorry about the formatting on this. I'll just read it to you. A person does not have to fit socially traditional ideas of gender to deserve our respect. For whatever reason, if a person does not fit your idea of what their gender should be doing, that's okay. That's not your life. That's not necessarily your issue. They're still human, still deserve respect. Trans community has a little bit of a deviated history from the larger LGBTQ history, and I would hate to plow forward through LGBTQ history and let you believe that I have given you some robust version of history without highlighting some differences for trans folks. Trans people, while Joyce had stated that she didn't know another lesbian until her 30s, I imagine that was probably around the 50s, 60s. Trans folks weren't really visible until about the mid-70s. There was one case in the 50s. Christine Jorgensen was a person that was very much in the national spotlight in the 50s for transitioning, but I can't say that that really meant visibility in any meaningful way for trans identities. So trans identities on the whole weren't really visible until about the mid-70s when Renee Richards, a very famous tennis player, transitioned, wanted to play tennis for the Women's League, and there was a huge court battle that did make trans identities much more visible. But even then, it was really considered a variation of sexual orientation and not necessarily a gender identity. Very much was misunderstood, probably until even the early 2000s. Certainly pathologized by mental health institutions. Trans identities are still included in the DSM. And that's really a double-edged sword, right? Because in order to get the medical interventions that we talked about on the last slide, you oftentimes have to have a diagnosis, which means there needs to be some sort of method to diagnose, right? That happens to be the DSM in this case, which can provide a pathway for medical intervention. However, if you have a mental health diagnosis and you're, say, in a court battle for your children's custody, that might not go in your favor. So it's not always a great thing to be included in the DSM, even though it does create a pathway for getting healthcare sometimes. This community is more likely to have experienced discrimination. Bar none, I know this statistic says more likely to experience discrimination from medical institutions, which is true, but also from everybody else. And because of that, are more likely to have transitioned later in life, right? Because, this community was really invisible until the 70s. This community maybe did not see being trans or transitioning as an option for them, and are more likely to have transitioned later in life, if at all. Some additional terms that you may hear if you're working with the trans community. I'm not going to go over each one of these. If you have any questions on any of them, please shout them out. I will highlight drag kings and drag queens is oftentimes lumped into the trans and non-binary umbrella. However, it's not a gender identity so much as it shares an important history with this community in terms of there being a safe place to play with your gender. That's not to say that trans people and lesbian, gay, bisexual people have never experienced discrimination even between each other. But for the most part, drag performers, this sort of drag provided a safe space for trans folks to play with gender, but it's not necessarily a specific gender. I think I said that probably 3 different ways, clumsily. All right. Anybody have any questions on trans before I move on to Two-Spirit? I know that can be a sticking point for some folks. If not, I will go forward with Two-Spirit, which is kind of part of the T, part of the plus. This is one that also doesn't get talked about too frequently. It is intrinsically linked with Indigenous, First Nations, Native American identities. This is another umbrella term that describes sometimes additional genders and or sexuality. Sometimes it is a person that identifies as both man and woman. Sometimes it is a person that identifies with a third or sometimes fourth gender. Really, it is a way to speak back to colonialism. Because before the nation was colonized, each one of these indigenous nations did not share our colonial perspective of there being a man and a woman, and that is that. A number of nations had multiple genders and had their own words, attitudes, and beliefs about that. And after they were colonized, a number of them were kind of forced into that heteronormative box that we talked about. But in 1990, an international conference, they adopted the word Two-Spirit really as a way to say an additional gender and or sexuality. It's really going to be dependent on the person before you. If this is something that comes up, if somebody shares with you that they're Two-Spirit, it's okay to ask, what does that mean to you? Because each nation is going to have its own unique definition, attitudes, beliefs. So just sharing that they're Two-Spirit doesn't tell you a whole lot about what their life is like. I will say that if somebody that is non-native, non-indigenous shares that they are Two-Spirit, think twice about that, because this really is linked very much to these nations. Intersex is the next one. So this is a congenital condition in which there are just normal variations of the four structures that we talked about in terms of birth sex, right? So hormones, chromosomes, reproductive organs, genitalia. I am a person that has a physical deformity from birth. Sometimes as we are forming, things don't come out as expected, and that can happen in a variety of ways, right? There are dozens of different intersex conditions. I think last time I looked, there were like 52. And it rarely presents a medical emergency at birth, unless there's a need to, as far as I know, unless there's a need to create a urinary pathway. There's no reason that surgical intervention or any kind of medical intervention couldn't wait until that person is a little bit more formed. We can talk to them about what gender do you identify with, right? For a number of folks in this community, especially during the time in which we're talking about, standard practice was medical intervention. But this can leave scar tissue where you really don't want scar tissue, right? It can decrease sexual function and sensation, some psychological trauma. This is also an identity that we don't talk about a lot. And yet, intersex people occur in 1% to 2% of the population, about the same as redheaded people. How many redheaded people have you met in your life? Like some, right? You've probably met some intersex folks, and they may or may not know that they are intersex, right? I've never had my hormones or my chromosomes tested, so I could be intersex. I don't know. Some folks are very aware that they are intersex, and there's have lived experience that reflect that. But it is also, to some degree, a very isolating identity to have because we don't talk about it a lot. The pamphlet that you're looking at, this Providing Ethical and Compassionate Healthcare to Intersex Patients, that's a real life thing. You can Google this and it's free. It's on the Lambda Legal website, and it's a huge PDF that gives you all kinds of really amazing information about intersex folks and how to best serve them. So I would certainly recommend this, especially for you folks, hospice and, hospital care, palliative care. This is going to be really important information for you. So if you have your smartphone or a computer before you, or any way of noting to yourself to bring up this packet, Providing Ethical and Compassionate Healthcare to Intersex Patients, this is very valuable information.
And we're also going to send out a recording of this session later so people can refer back to it as well.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. I'll also send out a copy of the slides so you all have access to these slides later too. Okay. All right. Queer. Wow, the formatting really changed in this. I'm so sorry. So the Q stands for queer, and you'll see that I've hearkened us back to the heteronormative box again. Queer just means not that somehow, right? So it could be, where's my mouse? Come back. No. All right. So it could be that either on this line, right, I have some kind of physical variation from heteronormative box. It could be that I don't identify with gender in ways that are kind of traditional, socially traditional, or it could be that I have romantic interests that are outside of this box, or any combination thereof. That's what queer means, is somewhere along the line, I don't identify with this paradigm. So again, kind of like Two-Spirit, if somebody tells you that they're queer, it doesn't tell you a whole lot. And it's totally okay to ask, what does that mean to you, right? If somebody's sharing this with us, there's probably a reason. And if we don't understand it, well, it's up to us to do a little bit of that relationship building that we talked about, right? Person-centered care means relationship building, means somebody shares an identity with us that's important to them and we don't get it. It's okay to ask about it. All right. How are we on time? I have 40 minutes left-ish. Okay, great. Let's talk statistics. What does this mean for aging care and hospice care? I'm going to give you some statistics to digest. And if there's nothing else that you walk away from this presentation with, I want you to memorize this top statistic. So LGBTQI plus people are twice as likely to live alone and 4 times less likely to have children. When we think about one of those first slides, when I was talking about formal and informal supports, and how the aging care system really relies on informal supports for that kind of advocacy, even administering medications and really doing the actual shepherding from life to death. That's oftentimes informal supports. That's not always medical providers. And if LGBTQ folks are twice as likely to be single and living alone, 4 times less likely to have children, those supports are really going to be hindered for this community. 20% avoid seeking medical care for fear of discrimination. About half of trans folks have had to teach their medical providers about trans care. It's typically not something that's taught in medical school. Sometimes it's a supplemental kind of education that you can receive here and there, but most often trans folks are teaching their doctors, PAs, nurses about their own healthcare. That's a challenging situation to be in. I know when I go to the doctor, I really prefer to rely on their expertise. So it can be challenging to feel like you have to bring to the table that kind of information. And this happens outside of the trans community too, but just note the disproportionate number there. 50% have had to teach their medical provider about their care. It's astounding. All right, next up. I think I'll just let you all read through these. If you have any questions on any of these, I will pause for a moment. And I want you to take note of the second one, that 48% of lesbian, gay, bisexual couples experience adverse treatment when seeking senior housing, and trans folks at even higher levels. Okay.
End of life. I mean, when we think about palliative and hospice care, what do we think about? I mean, who do you want with you? You want who you love. You want your friends. You also maybe don't want some people. So especially in hospice, palliative care, but I'm going to also say hospital care. But for some queer older adults, it's very scary, because why would I tell you? Because, hey, last time I told someone, he couldn't get in. He couldn't get in to see me. So if he just comes in as a friend, he can get in. But if I tell you he's my husband, it's not going to work. Because in the queer community, it's still, I'm sorry to say, I can think of something in the last few months where someone just assumed, hey, this is my life partner. They never wrote anything down. And out of nowhere came a biological brother, in one case, to make all the medical decisions. It's amazing to me that when family of origin folks have been out of contact for decades, and then suddenly they rise up and they have the rights at that point. So especially end of life care of all kinds, to make sure paperwork's in order. And it's never too late for that, right? That's the thing.
Yes, in terms of plans or goals, I do think that like the majority of people, my plan is to stay in my home. And I want desperately to stay in my home and be independent and to have a good quality of life. And should I be incapacitated and need to be in assisted living or independent, I think it would arouse a lot of the same fears that I've expressed, that you fear that you would be discriminated against or that you wouldn't be valued if people knew that you were gay. And so it becomes extremely important to know that you have allies and that caregivers are accepting and value you for who you are.
I just want to pause right here and actually take some comments from you all. What are you all taking away from that particular video there? Pretty familiar with those situations. There's someone in the chat.
I just think that oftentimes when folks need to seek that kind of support by going in assisted living or a skilled nursing facility, there's always so much vulnerability already for everyone to leave the safety of one's home to then rely on care from folks who you don't really know and don't have a relationship with. But then if you've had past experiences of discrimination, if you felt that you are not respected or valued or seen, and then having to rely on that and be that much more vulnerable in those situations, I can imagine how terrifying that might be.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. Anyone else? It can be very scary. And for this particular group of LGBTQ folks, right, this particular kind of age range of folks, they really did experience some intense discrimination during the times in which they were, growing up, coming of age. And that doesn't leave you. And so just because some things have changed doesn't mean institutions necessarily are going to have changed dramatically. Marianne, you had your hand up. Okay, if it comes back to you, feel free to hop in again. But I want you to know, I have certainly lied to medical professionals about the nature of my relationships to make sure that my partner could stay with me during times of vulnerability, right? And I grew up in the 90s. I can't imagine what it would have been like to, say, survive the 80s, 90s AIDS epidemic, in which people were outright denied healthcare, were kicked out of hospitals. I can't imagine how scary it would be to then feel like you need to seek out healthcare or, you know, assisted living, skilled nursing facilities, even hospice care, when you are that vulnerable after having survived something to that same effect, right?
End of life.
What? Okay, so let us talk about advanced care, end of life wishes. You may all be familiar with this, right? This is pretty common statistic for those of us in this industry, but about half of us become unable to make our own medical decisions at some point in our lives as we age. And the default in this state, I think in all states, is to treat aggressively unless there's some documentation that says otherwise. But if there's no documentation, then definitely in this state, this is the legal next of kin, right? We're going to look for a spouse, an adult child, parent, domestic partner, sibling, or close friend to help us make those kinds of decisions. Well, how do you think this might be challenging for LGBTQ people? Well, that statistic I wanted you to memorize. LGBTQI plus people are twice as likely to be single and living alone and 4 times less likely to have children. Who's going to be the legal next of kin here? For those of us that are partnered, they may not be a legal spouse. Marriage equality only came around in 2015, and I can't say that all of us are super jazzed about marriage equality. Not all of us are getting married, so it may or may not be a legal spouse, even if there is a partner. Sometimes policies and procedures default to legal next of kin. And so if you're not legally married, sometimes there are challenges in having your chosen loved ones with you. Adult children, not necessarily going to be options for this community. And then if we're talking about older adults, there may or may not be a living parent. If there is a living parent, that parent may or may not be in a healthy enough state to be making these kinds of healthcare decisions, to be that person to speak on our behalf. So this list of next of kin is challenging for this community. And I just wanted to touch base with some folks that had things in the chat. We've made some progress, but still have a long way to go. We absolutely have. Come out the first time can be so hard. Coming out to a number of providers when you're already vulnerable can easily be traumatizing. Yes, thank you. I have worked with a number of folks professionally, helping them kind of prepare to come out. And a lot of folks, even today, prepare themselves to lose everybody and everything as a process of their coming out. Fortunately, it doesn't always happen that way. But folks that are choosing to come out are oftentimes preparing to experience tremendous and very traumatizing loss. And you're right. The more we become vulnerable and the more we need to rely on other people, strangers, and then the thought of having to come out to those strangers easily, yes, can be traumatic. And then thank you, Ellen. You fight discrimination all your life and then have to do the same near death. That's certainly something that I hope I don't have to worry about when my time comes, because that is the last of the list of things I would like to have to care about when I'm preparing for my own death. Colorado is one of the only states that does not automatically fall to biological family. Thank you. I don't know state by state very well, so that is useful. Most states will default to biological family. If there is no one appointed by the person, the providers gather a group of interested people. That's really great. I'll let the rest of you read through this chat. This is really interesting. Thank you so much. Kim. This was in part developed as a protection for the gay community. Yes. looking for interested parties, right? This is kind of the last on the list in our state, is looking for interested parties. And that does leave us very vulnerable to folks like Linda had said in that video, to some folks that maybe we don't want involved in our care. So, okay, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So what are some barriers and challenges that this community experiences when we're talking about aging care, hospice care, palliative care? It is in just engaging with the system largely, right? Finding and maintaining healthcare can be challenging because we do continue to experience discrimination from healthcare specialists, from medical professionals. As of 2014, I know that's a number of years ago, I'm sure there's a more recent statistic, but 56% of lesbian, gay, bisexual people reported discrimination from their medical providers. Discrimination is not in our rearview mirror, we're still experiencing it. And so maintaining healthcare from people that see us as human and feel like we deserve the respect that we do can be challenging. If you are to find a primary care physician, awesome. I don't know about you, but the older I get, the more I go to the doctor, the more there are follow-up appointments and specialists and things to do beyond primary care. And so even if you are able to find somebody that you are comfortable with, I think maybe it was Kim, somebody mentioned this in the chat, again, having to come out over and over and over again because of this heteronormative assumption that everybody is straight and cisgendered unless otherwise specified, that does mean that you maybe have to come out a number of times, and that can be a barrier to receiving the appropriate care that we need, right? Financial concerns maybe make it difficult to obtain quality care. Aging care can be very expensive. And if you are a person that has experienced a lifetime of employment discrimination, maybe you've lost jobs, maybe you've been fired for being gay, maybe you've even just been passed over for promotion, your Social Security statement might not look that great. And if you're looking at having to pay for some expensive healthcare, you may not be in a position to receive that care. LGBTQ folks are disproportionately solo seniors. If you've been in this business for any amount of time, you probably know that there's not a whole lot of services for solo seniors. It's a big gap in our social services. We're going to have difficulty trusting providers. We're likely not going to be authentic with you. We're not going to come out that first time around unless there is some substantial effort on the part of our institutions. We're more likely to have experienced effects of drug and alcohol use and or abuse, to have experienced depression, and we are more vulnerable if advance directives are not completed. We're talking about palliative care, hospice care, hospital care. Fear of discrimination from providers remains true, right? Just because you're with hospice doesn't mean that we trust you more. Fear of discrimination is still present for hospice care. Fear of not being able to have our chosen loved ones is part of that. As we're dying, we want to be able to have the people that cared about us nearby. Oftentimes, I don't know, you all maybe have been through this a little bit more than I have. Maybe sometimes people want to be alone, but having the option is nice. And I know I'm going to want to have my chosen loved ones with me. Religious and spiritual beliefs is going to be maybe not what you expect. So I think we may have an understanding that there are some religious institutions that are not LGBTQ friendly, right? And a number of our hospice palliative care institutions are very rooted in religious and spiritual beliefs, practices. If you are an LGBTQ person that has experienced discrimination from your religious institution, you may not be in a hurry to look back on that. And so finding hospice care that is appropriate for you may be a challenge. But it also may be that we have a very gay and very Catholic person that is at the end of their lives, and they don't want to have to choose between having last rites that are very important to them at the cost of not coming out, or being their authentic selves and coming out and risking not having last rites. So helping this community, doing some of that due diligence and person-centered care, really learning about the value systems of each person that we're working with so that we can help support these folks in whatever avenue they choose is going to be really important. It can be challenging to have false assumptions about familial structures, especially if we're talking about like a hospice facility, right? That Uncle Frank is going to go to a place to visit Aunt Diane. If Uncle Frank never knew that Aunt Diane is a lesbian and hospice staff outs her to Uncle Frank, we never know what kind of safety concern that could be. That's not a situation that that family needs to experience during this time of grief and loss, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit too. Partners can feel isolated from grief support and bereavement services. In Pima County, we have Southern Arizona Senior Pride, which is an amazing organization that offers LGBTQ specific grief support. But not every place has that. Right? We're very lucky where we are, but not every city, not every place has LGBTQ specific grief support. And oftentimes people feel like they either, they may not want to have to justify the nature of the validity of their relationship in a grief support group, and they play the pronoun game and kind of lie about who their loved one was, or they don't lie about who their loved one was, and oftentimes have to justify the nature of their relationship as being equivalent to that of the rest of the group. I do have the statistic in here. These fears are not unfounded, right? We are still experiencing discrimination at substantial levels. And I know this statistic is dated, but if you remember just back to this summer, our whole nation, I want to say there was 23 states that had a number of bits of legislation that were all anti-LGBTQ. Not all of them passed, right? But just this last summer, 23 states, I think Arizona alone had 18 bits of anti-LGBTQ legislation. Most of them failed, but only 2 pro-LGBTQ bits of legislation. So this is a battle that we're still having. And even if you are not a person that has experienced discrimination directly, we know each other, right? We share a historic trauma. And I know as a minority in this community that I may be subjected to some discrimination. And that's minority stress right there. It is stressful to have to assess whether or not you are safe in any given situation. And it can be a barrier to being your authentic self in a number of different situations, including healthcare, including hospice care, including aging care. But there are ways that we can help. So I absolutely recommend Southern Arizona Senior Pride as one of those places that can help. They offer Honoring a Life workshops and individual coaching virtually only. I think they may be doing in person now, but I think it's only virtually right now. But what I really like about Senior Pride is that they also offer the 6th wish. So Elle reviewed the 5 wishes that you all have distributed this last year, I think, which is phenomenal. It's a really great tool. Senior Pride offers the 6th wish, which is something that you can use in collaboration with the 5 wishes. And it helps LGBTQ folks identify folks in their family that maybe they don't want to have involved in their care. When you saw John in those videos, John is actually a good friend of mine, and I am his power of attorney because he has a couple sisters that don't believe that it's okay for him to be gay, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with them. He has a brother that's very accepting of him, but his brother lives in San Francisco. So that's me, right? The 6th wish would help John say, if anything happens to me, these 2 people are not to have anything to do with decision making. or these two people are not to XYZ, right? So the sixth wish really helps support this community in those efforts. Pima Council on Aging also has some really amazing, similar to Honoring a Life, but it's called Let's Talk About Living and Dying. And we really get into the weeds about what resources are available in terms of advanced care planning. Preparativos Hecho en Vida is our Spanish version that also does similar work. It's not an identical presentation, but it does similar work in a very culturally responsive way. We also offer individual coaching and can help folks get their advance directives in order. And it is, until you are dead, never too late for that. So know that LGBTQI plus people are more vulnerable because of the structures of our end-of-life systems, really valuing biological family, making sure that we have these directives in order is going to be one of the best ways that you can support this community. But in addition, for the organizations that you represent, make sure that your organization is making a visible effort to reach this community, right? So that could look like a rainbow flag in your shared spaces, but it doesn't have to. You can put something on your website that's kind of an inclusion statement, some statement that says, here are the folks that we are welcoming into our doors. We reject intolerance and discrimination. You are safe here, however you want to structure that. But you can put something on your website that says, we welcome you. We look for that. You know, I talked about my friend John a minute ago. He told me a story about the first time he remembered seeing a rainbow flag in a medical professional's office. And it was his dermatologist, and it made him feel so much safer being there. It makes a difference. We notice it, we look for it. So when you are visible in your efforts, it really helps break down the mistrust that our institutions have built over the last century between this community and the services we're trying to offer. Try to not make assumptions. If you can remove gendered language from your vocabulary before you know differently, remove sir and ma'am from your language, remove husband and wife from your language until you get to know a person. Make sure that everyone at your organization is receiving regular training. It doesn't necessarily help you if you have trained all case managers or support staff and they know this stuff, but the person that answers the phone hears a deep voice on the other end of the line and says, how can I help you, sir? And that's not a sir. That's a barrier to this community accessing your services. So making sure that everybody has access to this kind of training is really important. Don't out anyone. If you make a mistake, apologize once and move on. This happens frequently in terms of pronouns. People get tripped up on pronouns. And our brains were trained with this heteronormative box, right? It is normal. This happens to the best of us. It still happens to me. I misgender people. And embarrassment is just about the hardest emotion to deal with, right? And when we're embarrassed, we tend to want to make it right immediately by saying, I'm sorry so many times. But that just really calls attention to a situation that doesn't need it. So apologize once and do better. It's all going to be okay. Asking open-ended questions about the people that we're serving, especially if they share something with us that we don't understand. That relationship building is really, really important. And if you can offer LGBTQ specific programming, like grief support groups, cherry on top. If you get reports of discrimination, assume they're valid. Don't assume that this is just a person that has lived through a history that is in the past and they have a chip on their shoulder. Assume that these reports are valid, listen, take immediate action, open up that investigation. It doesn't actually have to be your job to determine whether or not discrimination happened, right? That's why we have anti-discrimination policies and procedures. That's why we have HR usually to help us sort through that. So assume that the reports are valid, file that report, get that investigation going, and then ensure that that person that's making that report has access to those anti-discrimination policies, knows what the next step is, and can take that next step on their own. If they can't take that next step on their own, help them out. discrimination is a real barrier. It's something that our older adults lived through and with and has carried forward with them, but it's also a present reality for a number of us, right? They're real barriers for this community. And it's really important for us to make specific outreach to these communities so that we know that we are safe with your institution, with the people that you are working with, so that we can identify these unique needs for this community, right? Unless LGBTQI plus people feel like they can be their authentic selves with us, we're not going to know that they have this kind of set of unique needs and concerns. Thank you. My name is Sarah Bahnson. If you have any additional questions or concerns, that's where to contact me. I'm going to leave this up for a few minutes while I take your questions, comments, concerns, snarky remarks, anything you got.
Yeah, and folks can just unmute themselves if they feel comfortable doing that. But if you don't, you're welcome to put comments and questions in the chat. We'll see those as well.
Yeah, I see a comment from Pashta. Thank you, Pasha, who has worked in hospice. And it is not just LGBTQ people who don't want certain people involved in their end of life and death. Yeah, I feel like, I don't want to say that, but I do feel like that's kind of a universal thing. Everybody has somebody in their family that's like, not today, not any day. Don't want you. Thank you, Pasha.
Sarah, are you aware locally where healthcare providers can get training around trans care?
I would send you first to Southern Arizona Gender Alliance. They offer a lot of different types of trainings. I don't know if they have anything specifically for medical professionals, but out of any of our local resources, I would say that that's probably the best chance. Start there.
Thank you.
Yeah. El Rio is also someone that is an organization that is really putting themselves out there to try and be a leader in trans non-binary services. Last I checked, they didn't have any educational material that's available outside of El Rio, but that's a possibility too. Alan, thank you. It's good to see you again. Alan learned quite a lot tonight. It's good to see you again, Alan. And Alan Cunningham, thank you so very much. I'm glad this was helpful. Anybody else? All right, well, if there are no additional questions or comments, you may have found 7 minutes.
I think that Pashta has raised her hand.
Great. Hi, Pashta. Yes.
How do we get to Visibility Matters? I tried using the what you've got on the slide there, and it told me my internet couldn't access it.
Oh no, visibilitymatters.pcoa.org. That is correct. Since that's not working, I'll look into that. But if you just go to pcoa.org, here, let me navigate this here. I don't know, you can see my little puppies. Sorry about that. All right, we'll go to pcoa.org. And under ways we help you, what is going on? That's bizarre. Look for Visibility Matters right here.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I do not understand what this scratchy stuff is on my screen. Are you all seeing that too?
Yeah, you just got artistic at some point. I don't know.
Yeah, that's weird. Okay. Well, that's where you would go. Well, thank you all so much for your participation in this conversation. I really appreciate this invitation. It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much. I'm going to invite Elle back to kind of close us out.
Great.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Perfect. My message telling me something about my internet connection. I'm not sure what's going on, but I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here tonight. I know you all had a choice and you decided to be here and listen to Sarah. Thank you so much to Sarah and to our sponsor, PCOA, for having this. Remember, we do have 2 more sessions available before the end of the year. One being on October 20th, the Grieving Brain. Hope you guys can make that. Thursday, October 20th, from 6 to 7. And the next one will be November 17, which we talk about psychedelics and the end of life care. 6 to 7:30. So those are the last 2 sessions we have before the end of the year. Hopefully you guys can mark it on your calendars. Great topics. And once again, thank you all for being here. And Sarah, thank you so much. Wishing you all a great evening. And like I said, the presentation will be shared. It's being recorded. We'll send out, and Sarah also will be sharing the presentation with the slides, and you can go back to it and refer if you have any additional questions or want to refresh. So David, Jennifer, thank you for always doing a great job hosting and facilitating everything. We appreciate everything that you do.